Hello there again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the fourth and final part of our deck discussion basic building guide. And this being the last one, we've now looked at the previous 3 episodes. We've looked at all the hero classes and sort of, their strengths and weaknesses, and kind of decks you can build around them. And like I've said before, the type of decks, the type of thing we're looking at here is not building a specific deck for like a hero class or whatever, but has been looking at just how to create well-synergized decks, on a sort of a basic level. Some of them are a bit more advanced than others. Yeah, so it's been a nice mixed bag of looking at the hero classes. And like I said, this one is going to be looking at the neutral decks, and as usual, this video will also be accompanied by an article on Hearthstone Elite. HearthstoneElite.com, great site to go to for resources on Hearthstone and some news items and so on. So if you can't actually watch the video, feel free to go and read up on the discussion I'm having here on there. And I'm thinking this article is going to be quite a long one because there's a lot of cards to go through. So we're kind of going to be going through the neutral deck one by one relatively quickly-ish, just to point out where cards can be very useful and so on. Yeah. So, welcome guys, and let's just get straight into it because we've got quite a lot of cards to look at. So, let's get into Hearthstone, and there we go. Alright. So yes, we are looking at all the neutral cards, and let's start ourselves off with the zero-cost cards. And right now, and I'm just going to take a look at crafting mode. No, there's no others. Right, so, I'm wondering if we should... Yeah, I think we're just going to go into crafting mode on every page to see what might be new or different or what I've missed. Maybe afterwards, afterwards we'll go through any cards I don't have. Right, so let's start off with the Wisp. Okay, now the Wisp is a funny little card. It's just a 1/1 for no cost, which is kind of nice. It's good to add it to a deck if you want some very early board presence as well. You can drop a 1-cost card, like a Goldshire Footman or an Elven Archer or whatever, and just have another 1/1 on the field for the enemy to have to deal with. So, not a bad card, but often you can get much better cards in your deck, because remember, as soon as you add a card into your deck, it's taking up space that other cards could fill. So it might not be the best option for that. Moving on to the Abusive Sergeant, this is actually a fantastic card to, all round, just give a 2 attack to a minion for a turn. Very good in minion decks when you're buffing lots of minions up and so on, so very useful for the likes of the Paladins and the Warlocks and even the Shaman decks if you're playing minion heavy decks there. The Angry Chicken, this is a very weird card to have because it has an enrage, but it's only got 1 health. So you may be asking, how the hell can you enrage that? Because if you try, it's going to die. This to me almost seems like a bit of a joke card made by Blizzard. I mean, it's an angry freaking chicken. Doesn't seem quite obvious, but I mean, you can perhaps find ways to really make a use of this, especially in the likes of a priest deck where you can just buff its health up. Paladin deck, you can give it a +4/+4 and then enrage it. It's a very weird, funny little card to use, and you don't really see it very often. You might see it in a few arena decks, but not in constructed decks all that often. Argent Squire, fantastic card to include in a Paladin, especially if you're building a Divine Pally deck. And in fact, I'm going to be probably building and featuring a Divine Pally deck in the near future. The Divine Shield is great because it just means that it has to be hit at least twice in order to be killed. I mean, that's great. I mean, it's a 1-cost card. Ties up your opponent to make 2 hits, either with a spell and a minion or whatever. It has to be hit twice. Quite simple. Not a bad card for a first turn. The Bloodsail Corsair removes 1 durability from opponent's weapon. If you're building a pirate deck, and I've seen Husky, for example, try to build a pirate deck, they're very, very fragile decks, unfortunately, and the battle cry of this minion is very situational. It might be really useful if you're playing in a tournament and you know what class you're playing against. But in regular play mode, it's generally not so good because you don't even know if the class you're going to play against is going to have a weapon. And if it doesn't have a weapon, a 1/2 for 1, very, very, very average. Alright, the Elven Archer is actually quite a good card. Some people don't really like this, but the people where I've seen it played often, it's played incorrectly in my opinion. The battle cry to deal 1 damage, this is not a good opening card. So if you're playing this as your turn 1, you're actually misusing it, in my opinion, to a very large degree. The way to think about this card is that it's a proxy mage hero ability type card. If you have a enemy minion that you need to pick off that's only got 1 health left, well, 1 mana to deal 1 damage to it, and then potentially hit something else for another 1 damage on your next turn. Not a bad little card, this, if you play it correctly and put it in the right, play in the right scenario. Otherwise, if you just want something to fill up your first turn, this is not the card for that. The Goldshy Footman, this is actually a very nice taunt card. Again, nice. This is actually a very good early game card to play. So if you're looking for something to get some presence on the board quite quickly, 2 health is quite nice because a mage cannot pick this off on their second turn with their hero ability. This is not a bad little taunt if you do want something to just keep you protected very early on. The other thing is, even late game, this can be slightly useful because it just ties your opponent up and forces them to have to attack this first. Forces them to have to clear it first before they can go and attack the rest of your minions or your hero with, their own minions. So not a bad little card. The Grimscale Oracle, well, all oracles can only, all Murlocs can really only be played with all the other Murlocs. Getting a Murloc on its own, there's only a couple of Murloc cards that you can really play on its own, and this one is not one of them. If you have a Murloc deck, this one is essential. Giving them a +1 attack is great. And just be aware though, it is all Murlocs. So if your enemy is also playing a Murloc deck, well, this is going to buff them too. So you just need to be aware of that. Okay, let's move on to page 2. Right, we're going to look at the Hungry Crab. Now, as part of a hunter deck, this one is not too bad for a turn 1 card. It's a 1/2, and it is a beast, so it benefits from all those, beast buffing abilities. And if you are playing against a Murloc deck, it makes it even stronger with this Battle Cry. However, if the Battle Cry is not used, it's not particularly powerful. But say if you're in an arena and you're stuck for any other card, well, this one could fill the gap for a nice early card. It's not too bad if you're building a hunter arena deck. The Leponome, this is actually quite a fantastic early game card just because of that guaranteed 2 damage you're going to do to the hero. And often your opponent doesn't have a response for this, especially if you're playing first against a mage, because obviously the mage cannot pick this off on their first turn unless they use the coin, and then that's a waste of the coin, in my opinion. So really, you could force if your opponent is a mage and you're going first, you could force your opponent's hand to coin and pick it off with the Fire Blast. Personally, if I was facing this, I'd just ignore it until I could get a minion out to kill it properly. But, the nice thing is it does deal 2 damage immediately, and, some people freak out a little when they see it, so not too bad. The Light Warden, fantastic actually in a priest deck because of its synergy with healing. You can use this in any environment where there's going to be healing happening, even in a Paladin deck. The Paladin does have some healing abilities that go with it. And like it says, whenever a character, so that's anything. I mean, even if the enemy heals the hero, this gains 2 attack. You heal your hero, it gains 2 attack. So not too bad, and can synergize incredibly well with something like a Holy Nova. If you've got damaged minions on your side, you drop a Holy Nova, they all get healed, your hero gets healed, and this gains 2 attack for every one of those heals. Not too bad. The Murloc Raider, this is one of the very few Murloc cards that might be okay on its own. It does only have 1 health, so that's a bit of a concern. Again, if you're playing against a mage, that hero ability just picks this off right away. Coffee from a nice big mug. The Murloc Raider, there's better 1-cost cards out there like that Goldshy Footman. The Murloc Tidecaller, so this again is something you should not get unless you're building a Murloc deck because of how it synergizes with Murlocs. On its own, a 1/2 for 1 is pretty weak because it hasn't even got taunt or anything like that, like the Goldshy Footman. So this is kind of pointless unless you're building a Murloc deck. And if you are, it's pretty powerful. And again, just to bear in mind, this gets buffed when any Murloc is played, including by your opponent. Secret Keeper. Now, this is one of my favorite cards if you're building a secret deck. It's almost, you kind of have to have this if you're building a secret-based deck, either from the mage or the hunter. I wouldn't consider necessarily using this as part of a Pally secret deck, because a Pally secret deck is really, really weak. Pally secrets should be included as part of your deck on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to a full-on Paladin secret deck. But this is a fantastic card for that, only because you can buff this up quite nicely and do some nice damage to your opponent, especially if you plan on playing a couple of secrets at a time. The Shield Bearer. This is a funny little card because of its 0/4. Bear in mind, if you play against a priest with this, he can just swap its health and an attack, and then it dies. But otherwise, this is not a bad taunt on the first turn with its 4 health. It'll take some time for your opponent to, wear this down. And is not a bad option even for a priest deck because of the way the priest deck can buff up health and then swap or duplicate the attack to be the same as the health. It can be quite useful that. So you don't want to use a Crazed Alchemist because obviously it'll just die. So yeah, this is kind of a difficult one to put in place. If you just want to prevent damage, not too bad. A turn 1 card with its 4 health. But yeah, a lot of people often find better minions to put in a deck in place of this one. Alrighty, so let's take a look at our Southsea deckhand. Now, this one is, again, if you're building a pirate deck, you kind of want to include it. And this is also why pirate decks are often built around a warrior deck. Because warriors tend to be, warriors have more weapons pretty much than any other class. So you've got more chance of being able to synergize this and get its charge working. Otherwise, without a weapon, it's a pretty pointless card in my opinion. It's a 2/1. A mage, again, can pick this up very easily. If you have that Elven Archer, that's a great card to pick that kind of card off. So the Southsea deckhand is not really a very good card unless you're specifically building a pirate deck around it. Stone Tusk Boar. Now for a hunter deck, I've seen specific hunter builds that include a lot of use of the oh my goodness, now I've completely forgotten the name of that card. The Hounds card, the one that gives minions +1 attack and charge. Obviously the charge won't have an effect because this already has charge, but giving an extra attack is kind of useful. Not a bad little card for a turn 1 as well. Again, this is the type of card that can force a mage to play coin on turn 1 in order to pick it off. But often people just ignore it until they can take it out. But, 1 damage on turn 1 immediately, not too bad. The Voodoo Doctor, not one of my favorite cards. I mean, it does have the 2 health restore, and this is one of those cards, again, that you probably shouldn't play on turn 1. It's kind of meant to be played later to either restore health to your hero or to a minion. And in that case, it can also synergize reasonably well with a priest deck that has the Northshire Cleric because of that card draw ability. So this can be useful in specific builds, but in general, most people wouldn't find this useful, and it's not really included all that often in a deck. And the 2 health, it's really minor. It's not worth taking this over a lot of other cards that you could rather put in your deck. The Worgen Infiltrator Stealth is always a nice ability to have, and again, a turn 1 with stealth, that's kind of scary because a mage cannot pick it off. It has 1 health, but the stealth prevents it from being picked off, which is very useful. And then you can kind of leave it on the board and take your time and decide when to use it, when to use that to damage. Leave it on the board until you've got a raid leader or a Stormwind champion out to buff it up a bit and do even more damage. It gives you a bit of flexibility, the stealth, because it's not that easy to pick off. The Young Dragonhawk. Now this is a funny little card because it has Wind Fury, except you can't really use that Wind Fury on minions unless it's the second attack of the Wind Fury. And then it dies. It's a difficult one to really justify having in a deck unless you plan on using it as part of a beast deck around the Call of the Hounds. What is that card called again? I have to check. I'm sorry, I just have to see. Unleash the Hounds, damn you. That's what it's called. So Unleash the Hounds, if you plan on building that around an Unleash the Hounds focus deck, this is again something that you probably include because then you can do 4 damage with this instead of just the 2. Very situational, and you kind of got to have a plan around how to use this instead of just throwing it in as another minion. The Young Priestess. This isn't a terribly bad card for 1. It's a 2/1, but it does give a random minion 1 health, which can be useful. And again, that can be quite useful in a priest deck that's oriented around buffing up minions' health and then potentially swapping attack and health or duplicating attack to be equal to health for those kinds of plays. Usually priests don't include this because there are often better 1-cost cards you can include, or just any other card in general, but sometimes it can be quite useful. Acidic Swamp Ooze. Now, this is a big favorite of the arena decks because it's a 3-2 for 2, which makes it one of the more powerful and more aggressive 2 mana cost cards. And it has that ability to destroy an opponent's weapon, which makes it nice and flexible. Without the Battle Cry, it's still a reasonably good card. With it, it can be pretty damn potent. So, including this in your deck, especially in Arena, and you come up against a Paladin, a Warrior, a Rogue, a Hunter, that's it. No, and a Shaman even sometimes. They have weapons as well. You can keep this in your deck until the opponent throws a weapon on, or use it near the end to just help push out a bit more damage and put some more minions on the field. It's a very flexible and very nice card, this, actually. I'm expecting this, actually, it might experience a bit of a nerf because the addition of this Battle Cry with its 3-2 might make it a little bit overpowered. But Blizzard might just leave it alone. Who knows? Alright, the Imani Berserker with its Enrage. Fantastic card in a Warrior deck. Really is a good card because, Warrior is all about damaged minions. So you can imagine using an Inner Rage, which causes 1 damage and buffs, and then this thing Enrages, which gives it even more attack damage. Not a bad card to include in that kind of deck. Also in a Mage deck, which can just ping it with its hero ability to give it another 3 attacks, so it becomes a 5-2, essentially. And every time you attack it, it gains 3 attacks, so you can ping it again and make it an 8-1, for example. Not bad. Not a bad card to include in a specific combo deck. The Ancient Watcher, another funny little card. Yes, you read that right. It cannot attack. Now, what use is that, you might be asking? Well, include this in, for example, a Priest deck, which has got a lot of silence abilities. You silence its can't attack, and silence costs you no mana. Now, it's a 4-5 for 2. That's pretty powerful. For a turn 2 card, that is actually quite a lot of damage, and very difficult to pick off. Be aware there are other classes that can silence as well. The Druid can throw a silence onto an Ancient Watcher, for example. So when you see this card dropped, you can't really just ignore it and hope for the best. You might want to pick this off. Also remember, it can be turned into a taunt. It doesn't need to attack then. It can just get in the way and be a real pain in your ass. You might want to clear this when you see it come out. You don't have to rush, but try to get rid of it as soon as you can. It's a good idea. Bloodfang Raptor. This is actually a pretty nice beast card for the Hunter deck. Beasts usually you'll include in a Hunter deck almost by default. This is not too bad. The only downside of this, of course, is it's 2 health. So you look at something like the Acidic Swamp Ooze, which has a 3-2 for 2 mana. This is also a 3-2, but it's got no other additional abilities. So it makes it less powerful than the Swamp Ooze unless you're a Hunter. Then this can be actually very, very useful. 3 damage is quite nice to have as well. It's not a bad card for a Hunter to include. The Bloodsail Raider. This, again, really, all the pirate, it's like the Murlocs. You don't really want this on its own. It is actually quite a favorite of the arena of arena play, though, because especially if you're building a warrior deck and you've got weapons already as a warrior arena, you can get this card and really buff it up. With an Arcanite Reaper, this thing can get buffed up and do an absolute crap ton of damage. It's a nice card in those types of situations. So if you're building an arena deck and you've already got a weapon or two and you see this one come up, this might be a good option for you to take. Otherwise, in constructed play, you need to find a way to synergize as well as part of a weapons-based deck of your class, like the warrior or the rogue or any other class that can have some nice big high damage weapons. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. It's a 2-3 for 2, which makes it barely actually, that's not too bad, to be perfectly honest. So there are better options for 2 mana, but it's not that bad, I guess, if you really want to include that. The Bluegill Warrior now, a 2-1 with charge for 2 mana, as part of a Murloc deck, it's fantastic, because it'll probably get buffed up by all the other Murlocs, on the board. Otherwise, on its own, not necessarily that good an idea, that great an idea. There's better options out there. I mean, even the Bloodsail Raider is better than that. Even it has a charge, but a Bloodsail Raider for 2 mana is a 2-3, much better option. Crazed Alchemist. This is one of those weird cards, great for a priest deck that is trying to build that whole buff up the health and then make the health the attack. adds another option, because if you think about a priest deck, you've got the Inner Fire, which makes the attack equal to the health, which is great, except you can only have 2 of those in a deck. The problem with that is that you've got a deck of 30 and you're waiting for 2 very specific cards to come out. Now, that's difficult unless you've got an incredible amount of card draw to try and get to those cards quickly. Crazed Alchemist just doubles your chances of getting something that can do that kind of effect, which is great, because then, it just increases your chances of doing that. Add in a couple of light spawns, and now you have 6 cards that can, have that kind of effect. So the Crazed Alchemist is a great idea for a priest deck. It's also can be used when you have minions that you want to pick off easily, like the Oasis Snapjaw, which has 2 health and 2 damage and 7 health. Swap those around, and it's much easier to kill, obviously. Kind of situational, and you don't see necessarily a hell of a lot of play out of this. But not a bad card if you're kind of building it into a deck with a certain strategy in mind, and this helps you attain that strategy. The Direwolf Alpha. Now, this is a very reasonably good card to have in a hunter deck, obviously, because it's a beast. It does buff all both adjacent minions. It doesn't matter what those minions are. So it can even have some play in other decks, not just for a hunter. Also, this card is played a few times in Arena because it's just guaranteed extra attack on 2 minions, which is nice. Can get picked off relatively easily, but it's not a bad card, and kind of you want to include this in a beast-oriented hunter deck anyway, because it's cheap and it buffs. Not bad. The Fairy Dragon, also another very popular arena card because of its ability to not be targeted by any spells or hero powers. So a mage cannot pick this off with any of its spells or hero ability. You have to use a minion to kill this, or a weapon on your hero. So this is actually quite a powerful card. It's a 3/2 for 2 as well. Remember, the Swampooze is the same, and this has much better survivability because of its card text. Not a bad little card to include. Okay, the Frostwolf Grunt. Debatable card. It's got Taunt, sure. A 2-mana cost card. That's quite nice. It's a nice early game. But it's only 2 health. So it's not exactly the strongest taunt out there. At times you might want to rather use the Shield Bearer because it's got the 4 health. So that will last a bit longer and be more annoying. But at least this can do 2 damage. So if it gets attacked, it will do damage back to any minions that attack it. So if this is fantastic for early game, if you can get it out. Well, not fantastic, but this is best at early game. And a slight annoyance late game, which is helpful, but, at least it provides some annoyance. Ironbeak Owl, must have in Arena. If you see this in Arena, you take it because of that silence. Silence is a killer feature in Arena, and even in constructed deck play, it's a pretty killer feature anyway. Being able to silence a minion is almost the same as just killing it outright, because often when you silence it, it comes to the point where it's just so much easier to kill off. It's also a 2/1 for 2, which is very, very average, but it is silence and it is a beast. So in a hunter deck, this beast is actually it can get buffed up along with all the other beasts, which makes it even more useful. So this is almost a default card for a hunter deck because of the silence mechanic, and it's a beast, so not too bad. Knife Juggler. This one is very debatable. Again, it's a 3/2 for 2, so on that grounds, not a bad card. Not a bad card at all. It's the same as the Swampooze. The card text, though, after you summon a minion, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. This is a bit tricky. There are ways to synergize this incredibly well. So, for example, if you want to really make sure that you get the most out of this, for example, in a hunter deck, you can, for example, drop a Knife Juggler, then put in a Snake Trap. And if your opponent tries to pick off the Knife Juggler, the Snake Trap triggers. 3 snakes dropped out. This thing shoots 3 damage out to random minions, and then obviously will get killed off by what was attacking it. But at least you got some use out of it, which is kind of useful. Really, you need to be able to play this in a deck that has lots of minions to be summoned. That's kind of the point. If you're not going to be summoning a lot of minions, this is going to be essentially useless, and you might as well remove it from your deck. Alright, so the Kobold Geomancer with the spell damage, a 2/2 for 2, very average that. But the spell damage +1 makes it a bit attractive. The only problem with this is that it really would be useful in a mage deck. The problem is it's low health, so it can get picked off easily. So really the best way to play the Kobold Geomancer, if you're including it in a deck full of spells, is you should have a whole bunch of spells lined up that you can use. So you drop this, use a bunch of spells so that you get that extra spell damage effect, and then just expect it to get picked off, because it probably will. It can get picked off as a part of any of the AoE abilities. Arcane Explosion, Consecration, Holy Nova, all of those will pick this off along with any other minions you've got with 2 health. So yeah, you play this and then you use a bunch of spells to gain the effect of the spell damage, and then if it survives, that's a bonus, but expect it to get picked off. The Loot Hoarder, quite a popular card again in Arena because of the card draw, which is quite nice, and it's 2 damage, so it's almost a free card, because if this as soon as this dies, you get it replaced as another card. Being able to do 2 damage at your second turn is, well, third turn, because you've got to wait a turn, but yeah, that can be quite useful. The Mage can again pick this off because of its only 1 health, but then you gain the benefit of the card draw, so hey, why not? And you force the Mage to use 2 mana in an ability that it could have used in another minion instead, which, you know, can affect their tempo a little bit. Right, so let's move on. We're going to look now at a legendary, and I think I'm going to actually go back and look at all the 0 cost cards I don't have. I have them all. Okay, let's go and look at all the 1 cost cards I don't have. Let's see which ones are missing. None at the moment. Okay, wow. Lorewalker Cho is a 2 cost card. Okay, so we're going to look at let me turn that off. Okay, let's go back. Let's look at Lorewalker Cho. Now this is a funny little card as well. Now context, whenever a player casts a spell, put a copy into the other player's hand, and that includes you if you played Lorewalker Cho, so it makes it a very tricky card to play. If you're playing a very minion-heavy deck with very few spells, this might be very, very useful for you, especially against something like a mage, because now you essentially get a copy of all the spells they play. Very useful to play. Actually, this is almost, if you know you're going to be playing a spell-heavy class like the mage, like the warlock, like the shaman, you know, for example, in a tournament situation, this would be a fantastic card to include, because it doesn't exactly mitigate their spell damage, but it just means that it makes them hesitant. Therefore, you can expect this to get picked off very quickly, so being able to buff this might be nice, although if you're not playing a spell-heavy class, you can't really buff it. So it's a tricky little card to play, and you need to be careful where you include this, and it's very situational. The Mad Bomber. Now, I am not a fan of this card. Some people actually really like this. Again, like the Swampoos, it's a 3/2 for 2. So in Arena, that damage is considered quite nice. Except I do not like this Battle Cry, and I've seen so many situations where all 3 of that damage goes to your own minions and even your hero. So I'm not a big fan of the Mad Bomber, and I generally avoid it in Arena if I can. I really just take this as a, you know, my last option if none of the other 2 options in my Arena selection are any good. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the Mad Bomber. It's a fun card to play, but, you know, if you're really trying to win the games, this might actually cause you more harm than good. Alright, moving on. Mana Addict. Very strong card if played correctly. Now, this is not the type of card you play early game. It's only 2 mana, but that's so that you can play it later game and then, you know, coordinate a whole bunch of other things with it in order to buff it up enormously. There is a specific sort of 1-turn kill rogue deck that I've played, where, for example, you can drop this out on turn 5 and conceal it if you've got conceal in your hand. Wait for your next turn, because now your opponent cannot kill this off unless they have an AoE they're going to use, which might be a waste for 1 card. And then the next turn you should have a huge handful of rogue spells you've been saving up, and you just use them all, and eventually you can. I've actually been able to buff this card, for example, including with Cold Bloods, up to like a 28 damage. Pretty powerful, and end up obviously killing your opponent with that. Not a bad card to include in that. Not necessarily a good card in a mage deck, because mage spells are so damn expensive, and this is only +2 attack for the turn. So it's a very situational, and you've got to be able to play a class that has lots of cheap spells to buff this up for a turn, to make it really scary. Mana Addict, fun card to play. Mana Wraith, pointless. I don't understand this at all. It's a 2/2 for 2. Rather get a Swamp Ooze, or a Mad Bomber even is better than this card. Mana Wraith, in my opinion, is one of the crappiest cards in the game. All minions cost 1 more. I don't understand that. The only reason this might be useful is if you're playing a very heavy spell deck and you're playing against a very heavy minion deck. You're now going to make the minions cost 1 more. It's so highly situational, kind of pointless in any other situation except if you're playing against a Pele or a Hunter or a Warlock. Otherwise, pointless. And even 1 cost more, it's not that much more. There are better cards you can really get than the Mana Wraith, to be perfectly honest. Master Swordsmith. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1 attack. This is also quite relatively popular in Arena because of the fact that it just keeps buffing your minions with an extra attack. Doesn't get picked off that quickly usually because with its own 1 damage, it's not that big of a threat. And most people are okay with this buffing for a couple of rounds for an extra attack before they go ahead and pick it off. So this might be a nice one to add in a deck. It's very difficult to place this in a very specific type of deck. Really, in Arena, you'll pick this if your other 2 options aren't any better. And that's usually where you'll find most of its plays in Arena, where your other 2 options were just crap in comparison. So, Master Swordsmith, highly situational. Millhouse Mana Storm. That's right, enemy spells cost 0 until the next turn. Ouch. Now, the bonus is that this is a 4/4 for 2 mana. That's pretty nice. Turn 3, you can push out 4 damage. If you can buff it, you can push out even more. But of course, you know, imagine playing against a rogue, all his spells now cost 0. That is even a way to empty your opponent's hand of spells. It's a pretty nice way if you want to force your opponent to empty his hand. Might not be a good thing against something like a mage that might have some really expensive spells, but bear in mind that if you do play this on turn 2, and if you're going second, you coin and play this on turn 1, often, if you think about it, if you're playing a spell-heavy deck and you've got your Pyroblast, which costs you, your 8 mana, or your Fireball, which costs you your 4 mana, you might have dropped that in favor of getting some lower cost cards. So if you played early enough, your opponent might not have any high cost spell cards, because you generally don't start with really high cost cards. You want low cost cards so that you've got something to play in the beginning. But that doesn't always work out that way, so it's a very difficult one to play predictably. Let's move on. Murloc Tidehunter. Now, this is one of the few Murloc cards that you can play without other Murlocs in the field because it helps you summon an extra minion. So, having 2 minions on the field for 2 mana, a 2/1 and a 1/1, not a bad deal. And if you consider that a Paladin's hero ability is a 1/1 for 2 mana, hell, why not? You might as well include this, especially if you're building a very heavy minion deck like a Paladin does, like a Warlock might even. This is a pretty nice card to include, no matter if you have any other Murlocs or not. So not a bad card, actually, for turn 2. Novice Engineer, very, very nice card, actually, because of that the card draw mechanic on turn for 2 mana. In that Miracle Rogue deck, the 1-turn kill Rogue deck I was talking about before, this is often used as well, because you can imagine you've dropped your Mana Addict on turn 5, you're now on turn 6, so you drop your Novice Engineer, then you use Shadow Step to bring it back into your hand, and you've had the card draw already. Then now it costs nothing, so you put it out again. You get another card. You might have another Shadow Step, so you bring it back into your hand even again. You put it, and the whole time your Mana Addict is getting buffed by the Shadow Steps, and you're getting card draw with more spells in your hand, so you potentially can do more damage. There's just one situation where it's phenomenal to use this card. A lot of decks include this just because it's a 1/2 for 2, and you get a card. So why not? I mean, this is actually a very good way to include some card draw into your deck if you feel like you are suffering from that a bit. The Pint-Sized Summoner, often used for very minion-heavy decks. It's very tricky to keep alive. That's the problem with this. It's got only 2 health. And it's minimal, the saving that it gives you. It's actually been nerfed since the Beta White. The first minion you play each turn costs 1 less. It used to be 2 less. But yeah, it can find some use, and saving yourself a bit of mana when you're trying to get a lot of minions out relatively quickly, it can still be quite useful. The River Crocolisk. Now, I actually really like this card for a hunter deck because it's got 3 health. 2 damage is not a hell of a lot, but being able to have that extra survivability of health is nice. And bearing in mind that most of the buffs in the sort of hunter decks is on attack, not often health. There are some, but not a hell of a lot. There are a lot more attack buffs. So having that extra bit of health helps a bit on turn 2 for it to survive. It's very annoying to try and get rid of 3 health on turn 2 as well. So not a bad card, and I think this should definitely be included in any beast-oriented hunter deck. Sun Fury Protector. Now this card is Battle Cry to give adjacent minions taunt. This was it's difficult to decide whether this was nerfed or buffed, because this used to give all minions taunt. Now if you're building a very heavy minion deck, you don't necessarily want all of your minions to have taunt, because that forces your opponent to kill them all off, and you don't want all your minions killed off. So just giving adjacent minions, you can in some situations see it as a buff. You can see in other situations being a nerf. It just depends on how you look at it. While Pyromancer, after you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to all minions, including itself. So, if you don't do anything about its health, it'll only do it twice. Not a bad card to include in a play if you're playing against a very heavy, a minion deck opponent. Youthful Brewmaster. If you have a lot of Battlecry creatures in your deck, this is a fantastic card to include because it'll bring it back into your hand and you can play them out again, and just get that Battlecry effect happening all over again. A pretty nice card to include if you have a lot of Battlecry. Often used in Arena once you've gotten to the point where you have a lot of Battlecry creatures, and it will be useful for that. And a 3/2 for 2, also not too bad, just like a Swamp Ooze. Let's just take a look if I'm missing any of these cards. Yep, there's Blood Mage Thalnos. Almost always taken if you've got this for a mage deck because of its spell damage. And the draw card, it's only 2 mana, which makes it great for keeping your mana for your spells. So for example, if you want to do some really big damage with the Pyroblast, well, 1 extra damage with the Pyroblast, you drop this out, hit him with 11 damage instead of just 10. Not too bad a card to include. The Doomsayer, this is a tricky little card because at the start of your turn it will destroy all minions. But at the start of your turn, in other words, you play this, you end your turn, your opponent now has an opportunity to kill it. And it's only when your turn starts again, then it'll destroy all minions. So your opponent will be focused on destroying this one. And it does no damage, so you can destroy it for free, as it were. Okay, let's look through the rest of the 2 costs. There's Nat Pagal, also a very nice card to include for card draw. That 50% chance is a bit weird, but it's card draw. It does no damage, but it's got 4 health, so it can stick around. Not a bad way to get some card draw in your deck if you feel you need it. And yeah, that's all the 2-cost cards. Let's go to the 3-cost. I'm going a bit fast now because this video is starting to take a bit longer. Alright, Acolyte of Pain. Whenever this minion takes damage, draw a card. This is not a bad card to place. Even stronger in a priest deck if you can buff its health, or in any deck if you can buff its health. Use this to pick off 1 damage minions, or just to deal 1 damage to a 1 damage minion, because then you'll get card draw out of this. Pretty nice way to get some card draw if you can guarantee that it's not going to just get killed outright, because then you only get 1 card out of it. Alarmabot, if you're playing a druid deck, for example, this can be quite useful because a druid deck will often include very big, costly, high-cost mana minions. How this works is you drop it out in your turn, you give your opponent a turn, he might kill it off or might not. When it comes to your turn again, it'll automatically just grab a minion out of your hand and put it on the field and put itself back in your hand. And that's great because it might pop out a 7 cost, and then you still have all that mana left for the turn. It doesn't use your mana to bring that card out. Not a bad little card in a very situational place. Arcane Golem, a 4/2 for 3 mana, very, very, very nice. That is powerful. 4 damage for 3 mana cost, not bad at all. And a charge, so you can do 4 damage immediately. The downside, of course, is that it gives your opponent a mana crystal, so you need to be careful where you use this. Probably best played at very late game when you and your opponent have 10 mana, because then the battle cry has no impact at all. Big Game Hunter, also a very popular card in Arena because of its ability to destroy very big minions. If you are building a pre-constructed deck and you feel like you're missing some way to manage big beefy minions, this might be a great one to include because of that battle cry. and it does 4 damage for 3 mana, not too bad. Can get picked off quite quickly though, so be careful of that. Blood Knight, a fantastic card to include in a Divine Shield Pally deck because of its battle cry, where it absorbs all the Divine Shields and gains +3/+3 for every shield lost. Very strong card if you're building a Divine Pally deck. Otherwise, in Arena, for example, you'll only take this if you've got a lot of Divine Shield minions already. Otherwise, it's pretty much ignored. A 3/3 for 3 is very average otherwise, and very situational, so needs some thinking about. Cold Light Oracle, very difficult card to justify sometimes because it gives you and your opponent an extra 2 cards. But really, if you're running out of cards, it doesn't matter. You need more cards. Even if your opponent gets more, you're going to die without cards. This is also one of the few cards that you can include if you don't have any other Murlocs at all. It's a 2/2 for 3, so it makes it kind of below average when it comes to damage and health for the mana cost. But it's card draw, so, you know, it's an option. Cold Lights here, useless without other Murlocs, gives them +2 health. Nothing much to say there. If you don't have Murlocs in your deck, this is pointless. Dalaran Mage, this is also a relatively low cost way to increase your spell damage. Often this is used instead of the Cobalt Geomancer because it's got more health. Again, this really should be played in late game for a mage, for example, where you can drop this out and use your 7 remaining mana, for example, to deal extra damage around the board. Otherwise, kind of pointless to take. A 1/4 for 3, yeah. Demolisher, quite popular in Arena again because of the fact that it can deal 2 damage to random enemies. A 1/4 for 3 mana, it's kind of difficult to justify on that basis alone. It's exactly the same as the Dalaran Mage in that regard, and this deal 2 damage is random, so it could attack the hero, could attack a minion, you'd never know. But it's kind of a fun card to play, so if you're looking for a silly fun deck to build, this is a great one to include, because you never know what it's going to hit, but yeah, overall, it's a very average card. Earthen Ring Farseer, the battle cry to restore 3 health. Now, this is good again in a priest deck if you're going to be doing the card draw with the Northshire Cleric and that kind of thing. Otherwise, if you feel you need some more healing in your deck, a 3/3 for 3 is average, not too bad, and the 3 health is just a nice bonus on top of that. Emperor Cobra, and always include this in a hunter deck because of its death touch mechanic. Destroy any minion damaged by this minion, even if that minion has 10,000 health, it will kill it if it attacks it. So this is a good card to include in a beast deck because it kind of guarantees that you're going to kill whatever big minion that your opponent throws out. Very nice card. Flesh Eating Ghoul, difficult one. You need to keep this alive and maintain it. Very useful, for example, in a hunter deck if you've got things like a snake trap. You know, you have multiple minions out. For example, you have a taunt in front of this. You have a taunt and this card and a snake trap. Your opponent attacks your taunt. It brings out all the snakes, and you've sacrificed the snakes off to buff this up. It can get out of hand pretty quickly. If you see this played, you usually want to kill it as quick as you can. And very situational. You need to have a plan around this to combo it, to give it its extra attacks. Harvest Golem, a great one to include in a minion heavy deck because of the fact that even when it's killed, it comes back. You know, the golem that wouldn't say die. Sure, it's a 2/1 that comes back, but that's still useful. It still keeps some board presence out there for you. Not a bad card to include, and for 3 mana you can do a hell of a lot worse than that. Imp Master, a difficult one to justify. I don't like this necessarily if it's part of a minion heavy deck. It sacrifices itself, it deals damage to itself to summon an imp. So this could actually be great in a Warlock deck because of the way Warlocks can synergize with demons. So maybe this would be a good one to consider for the Warlock deck. Otherwise, in other situations, very average card in my opinion. AoE can take out all the imps, and it kills itself off eventually anyway. Injured Blade Master, a good one to include an example in a warrior or a priest deck, where you're playing around with the healing mechanics and the card draw, or to buff it up as part of a warrior deck. Not a bad card for that reason. Essentially, it's a 4/3 for 3, so not too bad anyway. And if you can play off the damage that it does to itself, like I said, with the priest or the warrior, pretty good card. Okay, the Ironforge Rifleman, we've got, this is the same as the Elven Archer, where you situationally pick to deal 1 damage. Without this battle cry, this is a shit. This is really a shit minion, and it's often avoided anyway because of that. Ironfur Grizzly, a great taunt for a hunter to include 3/3 for 3. Not a bad taunt to include for some early game protection in a hunter deck. Jungle Panther, a stealth beast. Include this in a hunter deck. It's a 4/2 for 3, and you can pick when you want to use it. That's what stealth gives you. Pretty nice that. King Mukla He's a very weird one. He's a 5/5 for 3, which is fantastic, but you give your opponent 2 bananas. Basically, your opponent gets 2 cards called the banana, and a banana can buff a minion with a +1/+1. So, yeah, you need to be careful. If your opponent is not playing a heavy minion deck, this is a fantastic card. Otherwise, you've got to be very careful when you use it. Magma Rager, I find this card kind of pointless. It gets killed off immediately. You play this, it's just going to get killed off. So, if you have no other option but to take this in, say, an arena, you could do worse, I guess. But, you know, if you really want to get maximum use out of this, you need to find a way to protect it so that on your next turn you can use it or make it a charge. Simple. Mind Control Tech, a very situational one, and the RNG side of it, I mean, you're forced to wait for 4 minions before you can use the Battle Cry. So your chances of picking the minion that you want is only 25%. But it's a fun little card to play and can really muck your opponent around anyway. Even if you take one of his worst minions, it still messes their tempo around and gives you an extra a minion on the board for yourself. Hey, you could do worse. 3/3 for 3 makes it average. The Battle Cry makes it kind of useful in the right situation. Alrighty. Sorry guys. Murloc War Leader, useless without other Murlocs, so enough said. Questing Adventurer, again in this kind of one-turn kill rogue deck. You can use this quite a lot. Drop it on turn 5, buff it up with a bunch of all the rogue spells that you'd use. Can be incredibly powerful to use. Raging Worgen. The Raging Worgen is fantastic in a mage deck because you can ping it to get its enrage. Good in a warrior deck because you can enrage it to buff it up immensely. And it's Wind Fury, which is even better. This is a really good card, often taken in arena as well, because if you can enrage it, it's absolutely phenomenal. 8 damage on a very simple enrage there. Raid Leader, often taken as well in pre-constructed decks because it can give all your minions +1 attack. Sometimes avoided in arena because it can get picked off quite quickly. Best use for this is if you've got a bunch of minions that can attack, drop it and then, you know, do your damage and expect it to get picked off next turn. Razorfen Hunter, fantastic for including in a heavy minion deck because of the fact that it summons a 1/1 boar. Also semi-useful in a hunter deck because the boar is a beast. Scarlet Crusader, Divine Shield, Divine Pally deck, really good. A 3/1 for 3 is kind of crappish, but the Divine Shield forces your opponent to have to attack it twice at least, which makes it far more useful. And you proc that with the Blood Knight, which will pop the Divine Shields and get buffed. Not a bad card to take. Shattered Sun Cleric, always useful. This is almost always taken when you see it, you know, in an arena selection, giving a friendly minion +1/+1 that you can choose. Very strong ability to have, and a 3/3 for 3 makes it a reasonable card for an average card for 3 mana cost on its own anyway. So a good card to take. A turn 3 Taunt, if you want a high health Taunt, this is fantastic. Again, this is one of these beasts that you kind of want to take for a hunter deck anyway. A great way to keep you safe while you build up all your minions behind it. Not a bad card to pick. South Sea Captain, useless without the pirates. Enough said. Tauren Warrior, I do not like this taunt at all because it's very difficult to get it enraged with only 3 health. And with it being a taunt, your opponent will probably just pick it off anyway. So the taunt actually works against the enrage mechanic. So and you'll find most people tend to avoid this anyway. It's kind of a pointless thing. At best, it's just a bit annoying for your opponent. There's better cards you can get for the 3 mana. Thrallmar Farseer with Wind Fury is actually a very good card. 4 damage. It needs no enrage. It's 4 damage, you know, when you can use it. Not a bad card to include for the 3 mana cost. You know, I'd take this if I had no better options, of course. And it beats out a lot of other 3 mana cost cards for what you get with it. Wolf Rider Charge, not a big fan of this unless you're in arena and you have no other better options. You could really just look at this as a card, as a spell card. It does, you know, it's 3 mana to do 3 damage immediately. If it survives, that's just a bonus. Alright, let's just take a look if I've missed any cards here. We've got the Tinkmaster Overspark. Transform a minion into a 5/5 Devilsaur or a 1/1 Squirrel at random. Games I've seen with this, it really is very random. You could get the 1/1 Squirrel, which is kind of pointless, or a 5/5 Devilsaur. So really the best way to use this is, and it can transform any minion, so you kind of want to drop this when you've only got one other minion on the field, and hopefully it's a 1/1 minion anyway. So if it turns into a Squirrel, no loss. If it turns into a 5/5 Devilsaur, big win. Let's go looking back a bit, and it looks like all the others are done. Okay, right, so get out of crafting mode, and let's look at our 4 mana cost. Alright, so the Ancient Brewmaster, very similar to the other Pandaren about the Battle Cry. Essentially the same mechanic, except you get 5/4 for 4, which is actually pretty decent. Even without the Battle Cry, this card is pretty decent. Ancient Mage, again, if you want to build a spell damage deck, this is quite good, because if you've got some minions on the field, you give them both spell damage. Now, all of a sudden, you can do 2 extra damage with all your spells. Not a bad card to include, but again, is best used when you are going to follow it up with a bunch of spells. Otherwise, it's more difficult for your opponent to pick off 2 minions than just 1. So that makes this more useful that way. But, best used if you can follow it up with spells. Chillwind Yeti, almost always taken in arena settings. Because if you think about it, for example, a priest cannot pick this off with its power word type spells. Those spells only can kill off 3 attack or lower, or 5 attack or higher. And I'm going to be doing a bit of discussion on some arena cards and stuff, but 5 health is the magic health setting in arena. Basically, the way it works is that if you look at all the attack damage that minions can do, at 5 damage, the amount of minions that can deal 5 damage drops incredibly, and the same with spells. So 5 and above health is kind of a sweet spot for where you'll be forcing your opponent to use 2 cards to kill off a minion at 5 health. Cultmaster, whenever one of your other minions dies, draw a card. Kind of useful, again, if you're playing a very heavy minion deck. With a snake trap as well, you get a nice bit of card draw, and a 4-2 for 4 is below average, really, but it's the card draw that you really play this for, not necessarily the attack that it does. Dark Iron Dwarf, very nice card, often taken in arena as well, often taken in minion decks because of that +2 attack it can give a minion. Not a bad card to include, you just need to kind of think about where you're going to include this and whether it's going to give you the benefit you need. Defender of Argus, a very nice card, especially in minion heavy decks. In fact, I include this in almost every minion aggro deck that I play because of that +1/+1. The Taunt is ancillary. I mean, that just slows your enemy down from attacking you a bit, but the +1/+1 is really where it's at. Minion heavy decks, Dragonling mechanic is awesome to use because it summons a 2/1 mechanical Dragonling, and with 4 health, this one becomes a little bit painful to try and pick off. Dread Corsair, not too bad to include in a weapon heavy deck like in the Warrior and so on, because you can, if you've got a big enough, if you've got a Gore Hell, for example, this thing can be free. So yeah, it's very situational. You've really got to plan a deck around, or include that in a deck where that really is going to be damn useful. Right, Gnomish Inventor, a 2/4 for 4 mana, not so good, but a card draw. You could do a lot worse with 4 mana, and this is often picked in arena because of the card draw mechanic. Leroy Jenkins. Now this one's a bit funny. It's a 6/2, so it can do 6 damage right off the bat with the charge, but it kind of mitigates itself by summoning 2 1/1 whelps. 2 1/1 whelps can pick off 2 health. So great to include if you're behind a taunt wall, or if you can pick off those whelps with some AoE once you've called them out. Then he becomes incredibly powerful. Leroy Jenkins, very interesting card to use, and a very funny card as well. Mogushan Warden, if you are very good in a priest deck, if you're going to be doing the healing buff and attack equal to healing type play, can be very, very strong for that reason. And even a general taunt with 7 health makes it very difficult to pick off, usually. Very slow going to try and pick off this card. So it can hold up an opponent for a reasonable amount of time. It's not going to kill many minions off because of its 1 attack, but can slow things down, which is not a bad thing. Oasis Snapjaw, similar to the Mogushan Warden, except for the taunt. It's a high health for a priest, which is quite nice. More damage than the Mogushan Warden, but doesn't have taunt. So you really do need to include this as part of a planned combo that you want to do. Ogre Magi, same thing with spell damage. If you're going to play this card, have some spells to follow it up, or some way to protect it from just being picked off outright. Old Murkai, useless without Mercs in the field. Enough said, and then it becomes pretty powerful. Sen'jin Shieldmaster, this is one of the better taunts in the game because of that magic 5 health, especially in arena that I mentioned before. 3 damage as well, which is reasonable. So if it gets attacked, it can often kill things that attack it, which is quite nice. So this is definitely one of the better taunts in the game. So if you see this in arena and you're looking for more taunt, you can do a lot worse than the Sen'jin Shieldmaster. Alright, Silvermoon Guardian with its Divine Shield, again part of a Pele Divine deck, not bad. 3/3 for 4 is below average, but with the Divine Shield makes it actually a pretty damn good card. Often very sought after in arena as well. Spellbreaker Silence, it gets taken. If you see this in arena, you tend to take it. A 4/3 for 4 makes it average, but with the silence makes it awesome. Silence in Arena is really one of those killer aspects that you always want to take. If you include this as part of a plan deck as well, you're going to be building it around the ability to silence, and that's why you include it. Stormwind Knight at 2/5 with charge, very debatable this card because it only does 2 damage for 4 mana. Kind of difficult to justify this sometimes, but you can do worse for your 4 mana, so this might get picked in Arena if you have no better options available to you. Generally though, in a pre-constructed deck, I really wouldn't find much place for this. The 5, like I said, the 5 health is good for the Arena, but otherwise in pre-constructed, not so much. Twilight Drake, this has been nerfed since the patch. It's a gain 1 health for each card in your hand. It used to be gain +1/+1 for each card in your hand. And they're giving it now for a static 4 attack. It used to be 1/1, gain +1/+1 for each card in your hand. This is not a bad card, and that's my wife just finished an Arena. Oh, shame, she only won 1. Oh well. Gain 1 health for each card in your hand. Not a bad card to include. Even with the nerf, it's still a reasonably good card. The Violet Teacher, if you're playing a spell-heavy deck, you kind of want to take this because of the 1/1 Violet Apprentices that it summons. Not bad as part of a mage deck, to be perfectly honest, because if you're playing a spell-heavy mage deck, you're not going to have a lot of spells. So being able to get out a lot of extra 1/1 minions is useful. This is also, along with the sort of spell damage type things, if you are going to play this, you want to follow it up with a lot of spells to get the most use out of it, because your opponent might just want to focus on picking this off. Okay, so let's just take a look at anything I might have missed. We've got, okay, the Violet Teacher we saw, and that's it. Okay, cool. So let's go on to the 5 mana cards. Get out of crafting mode, 5 mana. Right, Abomination, take it. If you see this in Arena, you take it, because that deals 2 damage to all characters, and it's a taunt. This is fantastic to use when your opponent has a ton of minions on the board, and you've got this as an option. You drop this down, he picks it off, it's going to deal 2 damage, and will just help you out in the long run anyway. Actually a very good card to include. Even, yeah, just include it. It's a very good taunt. Azure Drake, great for a mage deck again with the spell damage and card draw. And again, with any spell damage you see, you want to be able to follow it up with spells just to get the most use out of that spell damage that it gives you. Booty Bay Bodyguard, this is one of the weaker taunts in my opinion. It does 5 damage, which is quite beefy, but with only 4 health, there's a lot of minions and spells that can do, 4 damage. Not necessarily the best in Arena, but you can do a lot worse for a taunt at 5 mana. Darkscale Healer, again situational. You might feel like you need more healing in your deck, especially if you're in a Warlock deck, for example. Warrior deck might find this useful if you're going to be dealing damage and then just restore health to everything once you've buffed them up with the damage. Again, it tends to get picked in Arena because of its 4/5, so that really in Arena is the golden number. For 5 mana, it's not that fantastic, but it does have restore 2 health. This is also one of the best taunts in the game because of that high 6 health. I like high health taunts because that's the point. Last for a long time to be very annoying, even if its damage isn't that large. A Frostwolf Warlord. Again, this is kind of one of these cards that tends to be taken in Arena quite a lot, especially if you've got lots of minion play. If you're going to be pre-constructing, this is great to take. In a Paladin deck where you're going to have lots of minions on the field, drop this out and can be quite a beefy creature for 5 mana. You can do a hell of a lot worse. Gadgets and Auctioneer for card draw, not a bad card at all, especially if you're playing a rogue deck with lots of cheap spells. You drop this out on turn 5, throw a bunch of cheap spells to pick off minions and do damage, and you get card draw. Pretty nice, that card. Right, moving on. Gurubashi Berserker, good in a mage deck and a warrior deck where you can proc that Enrage. It's basically an Enrage. Yeah, this is actually a fantastic card for a mage. Just ping it for 1 each turn, and you get 3 extra attack you can now put out into your opponent. Warrior deck is also pretty useful for this. The Nightblade, a debatable card. Really, it is a 4/4 for 5, and it deals 3 damage to the enemy hero, but that is really not important because it does it only once. Only if you consider putting this back into your hand and playing it again, maybe, but it's 5 mana cost, and that's quite high. And a 4/4 for 5, yeah, if you've got no better options in Arena, for example, you might pick this, but in a pre-constructed deck, it's really not that good a card. Silverhand Knight for a minion style deck, very, very good because of that summon ability. Spiteful Smith, fantastic for a warrior deck because you can almost guarantee you're going to be able to do 1 damage to it, and if you have a weapon at the same time, you're now giving it +2 attack, and it's 6 health, so you can do a lot of damage to this. It's quite a nice card to include in something like a warrior deck. Otherwise, kind of useless, you know, in any other deck. Stampeding Kodo, great. You should include this if you've got a hunter deck, especially because it can just destroy a minion with 2 or less attack immediately as soon as you put it on the field. Always useful that. And a 3/5 for 5, it's average, but you know that destroying a minion as soon as you play is the killer feature of the Stampeding Kodo. Stormpike Commando, again, you play this situationally. If there is an enemy minion with that can be killed off with the 2 damage battle cry, that's where you play this. 4/2 for 5 makes it kind of just below average. It's not that great a card, but it can be situational if you find that this deal 2 damage would be useful to you. Arena, you could do worse. You know, you might not have better options than this in Arena, so not too bad. A 5/5 stealth tiger makes this an awesome card, and I would honestly suggest this gets taken if you can in any hunter deck. Not a bad card at all. And the Venture Mercenary, this is almost always taken as well in Arena because it's a 7/6 on 5 mana. That's an enormous amount of damage you can do. Sure, it does a lot. It makes your minions cost 3 more, but you're doing 7 damage every turn. That is phenomenal, and your opponent will tend to try and kill this off really quickly anyway. So this is a great way to suck in cards from your opponent, because he's going to have to use at least 2, maybe 3 minions or cards. So it's a great way to help sucker in and help clear the board a bit and you know, force your opponent to play more cards. Very nice card for Arena. In Pre-Constructed, this would be fantastic if you can silence it. So for a priest, for example, you can drop this and silence it so that your minions don't cost 3 more. That is also quite fantastic. Alright, let's look at crafting mode and see what I've missed. Sylvanas Windrunner, a funny little legendary this. Take control of a random enemy minion, randomly. So if you're playing against a very heavy minion deck, and your opponent has lots of minions, the chance of it taking control of one you really want is very small. But it's a 5/5, which makes it kind of average. And the Death Rattle might be useful, you know, mess your opponent around a little bit. Let's see what else we've got here. We've got a Harrison Jones, destroy your opponent's weapon and draw cards equal to its durability. So very situational. Again, a 5/4 for 5 makes this average to just below. And destroying an opponent's weapon and card draw. So if you're playing against, for example, a warrior, a rogue, those, you know, any class that can have weapons, this could be very useful. Captain Greenskin, give your weapon a +1/+1. This is why you see that's why you'll see that pirate decks really are suited to be played with the warrior, because of this. Gives your weapon an additional attack and additional durability. Not too bad. Faceless Manipulator, a very powerful card. This, imagine being able to copy your opponent's, you know, 9 mana cost legendary. This can be a very powerful card to play, and when this is seen in Arena, it's often taken as well. And as part of a priest deck, it's pretty powerful as well, because the priest is full of the mind controls and those kinds of cards. You can even copy one of your own cards, which is quite nice. Alright, let's go look at 6 mana quick. Archmage, again, this is one of these cards. To me, the high mana cost doesn't justify it. The 7 health means it might stick around for a bit longer, so you could drop this, for example, as part of a mage deck to get this extra spell damage, and then wait till your next turn to be able to play a lot of spells, because it might just hang around long enough for that. It might not. So it's sometimes difficult to justify, and with only 4 attack, it's kind of difficult at that point as well. Argent Commander, this is actually a fantastic card. I mean, it's a 4/3 for 6, which doesn't look very good, but charge and Divine Shield makes this awesome. And it's often taken, again, in Arena, because any Divine Shield is often taken in Arena because you have to attack it twice. There's no way around that. And the charge means that you can immediately pick off an enemy minion, and it'll still be alive on the field, without a Divine Shield, potentially, but it'll still be alive. Boulderfist Ogre, often taken in Arena as well, because of that nice high 7 health. 6 damage is pretty nice as well, and it obviously gets buffed by other minions. Ken Bloodhoof, a very, very nice legendary, this one. Essentially, you have to kill this card twice because of its Death Rattle. You kill Ken, then it comes back as a Bane Bloodhoof at 4/5 as well. So not bad. It's basically 2 4/5s in one, so it justifies that 6 mana cost. Frost Elemental, difficult one to justify sometimes. It is quite a good card. It has that magic 5 health, so it means it can force 2 cards out of your opponent to pick off, And the freeze character is quite nice if you just want to prevent a really big minion of your opponents from being able to attack you for a turn. Can be a good card to include as part of an arena and as part of a pre-constructed deck around freeze, especially a Frost Mage style play. Galban Mechatalk, this is a very weird and funny card because the awesome inventions that Galban can summon is not always limited to your own cards. So it might buff, for example, an enemy minion with +1. It has another invention that heals everything on the field. So, it can make games last a hell of a lot longer. Just keep healing and healing and healing. Kind of a difficult card to justify playing. It looks quite pretty, but you still got to find a good place for this. A 6/6 for 6 actually makes it a fantastic card just on that basis, but the awesome invention can often just completely mitigate any advantage of that. Lord of the Arena, one of the best taunts in the game, to be perfectly honest. It's got that magic 5, so you see this in Arena, you pick it. 6 damage is an enormous amount of damage, to be perfectly honest, so this is actually a very, very good card to have. On pre-constructed, you need to have a reason to have this. It depends on what type of deck you're playing and whether it's useful or not, so just bear that in mind. Priestess of Elune, very situational, restore 4 health to your hero. If you feel that you haven't got enough healing in your deck, this might be a great one to include. It's a 5/4 for 6, which makes it kind of below average, but the restore 4 health kind of returns back to average status. Reckless Rocketeer, this to me is just a 5 damage spell for 6 mana because it's not going to last long with only 2 health. And if you use this against an enemy minion, it's usually going to do more than 2 damage. So really, it's just a overpriced fireball to me because it does the 5 damage. Fireball does 6, so it's even worse than a fireball. Really not often taken, even in Arena, because it's kind of hard to justify that. Unless you feel you really need charge to just go out and destroy an enemy minion and pay 6 mana to do it. Difficult to justify, sometimes. The Sunwalker, this is also one of the most awesome taunts in the game because of the Divine Shield. Like I said before, you have to attack it twice to be able to kill it off. And with that magic 5 health, it's very difficult to kill off then. You're probably going to have to attack it at least 3 times to kill it. Very nice taunt to include. If you see this in Arena, you kind of want to take it. The Beast. Funny card that you kill it, you give your opponent a 3/3. Tough to justify sometimes. But it's a 9/7. And if you have Unleash the Hounds, yeah, you can see where that's going. 10 damage immediately for 7 mana. Not too bad. Wind Fury Harpy, this is a fantastic card. Actually, you see this again in Arena because of that 5 magic health and the 8 damage that it can do, or split 4 damage. Actually, a very, very nice card to get. Wind Fury is one of those mechanics that I absolutely love. You buff this, and you remember, if you buff a Wind Fury creature, you're doubling. You can double the buff that it gets. If you buff it by 1 attack, it gets 2 extra attack instead of just 1. So, very nice card to include. Okay, let's see what I might have missed. And I see there's an Illidan Stormrage, a very funny card as well. A 7/5 for 6 makes it pretty good. And a 2/1 Flame of Azeroth whenever you play any card. So, again, if you're playing a heavy minion style deck, you pop this out and drop... Or actually, even in a rogue deck would be very useful. You drop this and you play a lot of cheap spells, you're going to get a lot of 2/1 Flames of Azeroth on the field. Hogger, this is actually a very, very good card with that 2/2 null with Taunt because it keeps itself protected the entire time, which is kind of the point and fits the lore. A 4/4 for 6 isn't so great, but like I said, every time you end your turn, you get a 2/2 null with Taunt, which makes this a very good legendary. Let's take a look. That's it. Okay, great stuff. Crafting mode off. Let's look at 7+. Right. Baron Geddon. At the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to all other characters. Very scary. Other characters as well. So it doesn't deal damage to himself. So when your opponent is kind of low on health, you can kind of use this card to ensure that you're going to do 2 damage to all of them. And with 5 health, it's not that easy to pick off. Not the best legendary for 7, but it can be pretty scary when your opponent sees it drop down in the field and reads that card text. Corehound, difficult to justify. You might take this in Arena if you have no better options on the draw. I don't even think you'd necessarily advise including this in part of a Hunter Beast deck. The 9 damage is nice, but with only 5 health, it's difficult to justify having that around because it can be picked off relatively simply in a pre-constructed deck. Yeah, it's a difficult one to justify. It really is situational if you feel like you want to include this. If you feel your Hunter Beast deck is lacking late game power, then maybe you will include this. Ravenalt Assassin, fantastic card. Take it if you're in Arena. 7/5 with Stealth. Oh my god, that's amazing. If you're going to include this in pre-constructed, you need to kind of build around this because it's quite expensive to just include by default. So you need to think about whether you can include that or not. Stormwind Champion, kind of, if you get this in Arena, again, it's one of those you take because 1/1 for all minions and it's a 6/6. Very, very, very nice card, this. The War Golem, very average. If you see this and you've got no other option in Arena, you might take this. Just because it has no other effect. In pre-constructed, you won't really see this included a hell of a lot because it doesn't add any other beneficial effect to the rest of your deck. And there's better cards you can pick for 7 mana, for example, like the Stormwind Champion we just talked about. Alright, let's look at Gruul. At the end of each turn, gain +1/+1. Now, bearing in mind this is 8 mana, so the earliest you can get this out, unless you're a druid, is at 8. Or at 7 if you've got the coin. Okay, sure, correcting myself a lot there. This one can get out of hand pretty quickly, but your opponent will focus a hell of a lot on this. You can basically say that Gruul is an 8/8 because you play him, and at the end of your turn he gets +1/+1 anyway, so he will be an 8/8 no matter what. So in that case, it's a pretty decent card for 8 mana because it's an 8/8. It can become a 9/9 if your opponent picks it off. It can, does 1 damage to it. It becomes a 9/8. You know what I mean? So, not too bad a card, this. Better than the War Golem, that's for sure. Alexstrasza. Now, this is also one of these situational cards where you can either force your opponent's health down to 15 if you want to try and rush him down, or if your health is low, buff yours up to 15. And for an 8/8 for 9, that's also not too bad. So this could be a very useful card to include just on that basis, for some late game punch. Onyxia. I actually used this card myself in a minion deck because of the fact that it summons all those 1/1 whelps until your battlefield is full. So it's great for a very minion-heavy deck playstyle. Otherwise, very situational. 8/8 for 9 is okay. That's actually pretty nice. The 1/1 whelps is pretty nice as well. So it's a pretty damn decent card to include. Do we have any more? Yes, we do. The Sea Giant. Now, it costs 1 less for each other minion on the battlefield. Good card if you want some late game punch with a very heavy minion playstyle. Because if you've got a board full of minions, say 6 of them, this costs you 4 mana. Not too bad. Mountain Giant. This is a difficult one because you need a lot of cards in your hand to play this. You can get a maximum of 10 cards in your hand, but it's other cards. So the cheapest that this can get is if you have 9 other cards in your hand, and then it costs 3. But you very rarely get that many cards. So you kind of have to play around with this, include it in your deck. And if you feel you tend to have a deck that's always got lots of cards in it because of the card draw or whatever, then it might be very useful. But otherwise, it's very situational. You've got to decide on it. Molten Giant costs 1 less for each damage your hero has taken. So this might actually be very useful in a Warlock deck, for example, where you're expecting to take lots of damage from all those, self-sacrifice abilities that the Flame Imp might do and your Life Tap will do and so on. If you're expecting you're going to be taking a lot of damage, this one can be very useful. Also, if you feel like you want to sort of get out of jail card with this one, you're going to drop an 8/8 on the field when you're struggling for other damage, other ways to beat your opponent. This is not a bad card. In Arena, if you've got no better option, you could do a lot worse. So, very situational, and you might want to plan around this card rather than just include it. Alright, so let's just take a look and see what I might have missed. There's Deathwing. Oh my god, such a terrifying card. A 12/12 for 10. He is fucking terrifying card. That 12/12 is offset by the fact that it destroys all minions on the board, so it'll clear the board and throws every card in your hand away. So when you drop Deathwing, you've kind of got to rely on the fact that this is what is going to win the game for you. And if it doesn't, if it gets polymorphed, for example, oh my god, you just lost. Yeah. So you've got to be very, very careful with this card. You've got to make sure that you'll be able. You can't make sure you've got to be able to play this the next turn, because the only way is you try and see if your opponent has no cards. Terrifying card to play. Ysera, a very good legendary. It only does 4 damage, but the point of this is the dream cards. I have not actually played this out of a lot, so I don't know what the dream cards are. But from what I've seen of some of them and heard from others, the dream cards are always good cards. So this is not a bad one to play. Okay. Ragnaros the Fire Lord. At the end of a turn, deal 8 damage to a random enemy. You can't actually attack with this guy, so that makes it a bit tricky to play. But just drop this out and you'll deal 8 random damage to random enemies. The only way to mitigate this, if you're facing it, if you can't kill it, or polymorph it, or whatever, is just to keep throwing lots of minions and hope for the best. And actually we talked about Nosdormu. This is a very strange card. If you need to get 8/8 out for 9 mana, you can do better than this card, because players only have 15 seconds to take their turns, including you. So if you don't have a lot of complicated combo plays and your opponent tends to take a very long time to do their turn, this might benefit you. Otherwise, yeah. Malego, spell damage +5. Amazing for a spell, for a mage deck, because spell damage +5. Oh my god, a Pyroblast that does 15, a Fireball that does 11, a Cone of Cold that does 6. That is actually pretty amazing. And with 12 health, he's going to be sticking around for a very long time, unless your opponent has Silence or a polymorph or whatever other, single target, assassinate, that kind of stuff. But otherwise, a fantastic card to have if you can in a mage deck. Very late game, but a great way to finish off an opponent. If he's got 15 health and you have a Pyroblast, drop your Malygos and wait till your next turn, and then he's dead. Game over. Alright, let's look what else have I missed, and that's it for the neutrals. Okay, so, geesh. There's a lot of neutrals out there to look at, and thanks for sticking with me through that. English, let me speak English. Yeah, that was a bit of a long video, 1 hour and 17 minutes, but there was a lot of neutrals to go through, so yeah, thanks so much, guys, and next time my next few videos, I'm going to be starting to look at very specific deck builds and how they work and why they work, and some gameplay behind them, just to show how they work and their effectiveness. Otherwise, don't forget to go to Hearthstone Elite and check out some of our news articles on there and other things that we include. We've got deck builders and a bunch of other tools. Also, feel free to leave comments if you guys want, to say something, or you want me to do certain videos. I don't mind advice. Ask me, tell me what you want, and I'll do them. And yeah, subscribe, join my Google Plus page, follow me on Twitter at HearthstoneZA. And thanks so much, guys. See you next time.